Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Marcy Hronik, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm joining you today from Calgary, or Treaty 7 Territory and Métis Nation Region 3. And I'm here to spend some time with you this afternoon talking about Gender-Based Analysis Plus, or GBA Plus for short. So thanks so much for having me and for committing to spending a half hour together in this breakout. This topic is extremely important, especially in our current climate. And I look forward to sharing with you about this powerful equity tool and how you could apply it to your work, to your service delivery, to your programming, and even to your research. So to kick us off, my background is I'm the founder and president of Canadian Equality Consulting. Canadian Equality Consulting works with any type of workplace really to help them advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. We work with a lot of government, nonprofits, private sector companies, and universities across Canada. And one of our specialties is GBA Plus. So throughout this breakout session today, if you have any questions, I believe what you have to do is move your mouse, hover your mouse over my image where you see me talking and the screen, and then click on the Q&A button. And then that's where you'll be able to enter in your questions. But if you write it in your chat box, I won't be able to see it. Okay. So again, just to kick us off, a quick overview, Canadian Equality Consulting. I'm in Calgary. We have folks all across the country, though, in Vancouver, Toronto, and also in Edmonton. And we love working with any workplace to support them along their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. And here's just high level a bit about our services. We support that entire sort of journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether it be full-scale audits or assessments on organizations, including surveying, design and implementation of programs, customized training. Again, more information about Gender-Based Analysis Plus. We also have an equitable and inclusive leadership certification program and subscription services. And overall, our goal, and the goal also of GBA Plus, is to achieve equality, which is essentially being able to identify and remove any barriers that groups of people may face in order for all people to have equal access to rights and opportunities. And the way to get there is through equity, which is essentially recognizing that all people are different, have diverse and different needs. And in order for folks to be successful, we need to tailor our approaches so that they can have fair and equitable access. So this is an overview of our workshop. We're going to kick it off by talking a little bit about what is GBA Plus, where did it come from? We're going to talk a bit about intersectionality because GBA Plus is an intersectional tool. Then we're going to review some of the core concepts of GBA Plus, and those include diverse identity factors, power, privilege, and unconscious bias. Then we're going to go over what the GBA Plus process is and some examples so that by the end of our session today, you'll have a fulsome understanding of what it is, how it could maybe be applied and benefit your work, and also how exactly to do it with that process. So again, the context, sort of the situational context around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and GBA Plus specifically, is really gaining in momentum. We see GBA Plus is a priority of government. It's the equity tool that was first created by the Government of Canada around 1995, but it's really gained sort of steam and traction within the last probably 10 years, and even more so within the last 5 years. But GBA Plus is a pretty powerful tool that's been adopted and integrated by every government department. You'll see it in funding agreements. So nonprofit organizations, when they apply for funding even, they're required to have a lens like this on their programming. Universities are being required to adopt it. and same with even private sector companies. But this is really relevant because we know that our world is ever increasingly becoming more diverse, and people have different needs, and we need to be able to identify and understand that. So there's rapidly changing demographics, from high rates of immigration, as well as older generations staying in the workforce and workplaces longer, and younger generations entering. There's also increased community awareness around inequalities. So we saw that around the Me Too movement, with increased awareness around public safety. There's a lot of conversations in mainstream media around diversity and representation on boards and leadership and politics, and also most recently with Black Lives Matter. And despite some progress being made in maybe reducing or bringing to light the explicit discrimination that exists, discrimination continues to be pervasive and persistent across all indicators of success across the country. GBA Plus is an equity tool that also fulfills international and national obligations. So the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls final report included references to the importance of a gender analysis, and many international agreements also call for that. And as always, there's always this desire, no matter what you do, to deliver effective and efficient programs and services. And GBA Plus, as this powerful equity tool that includes diversity and even inclusion considerations, can help you do that. So here is quickly what it is. So essentially, it's an analytical tool that's designed to help you assess the impacts of your decisions or any type of work really on diverse groups of people. It helps you understand who benefits from your work and who may be unintentionally excluded. It takes an intersectional approach. So it doesn't just look at diversity and diverse identities. It looks at how those diverse identities overlay and interplay and interconnect to create unique experiences of privilege or oppression or discrimination. GBA Plus also recognizes that historical inequities and current power structures in our workplace policies, from government and our laws and other institutions exist. And essentially, the goal of GBA Plus is to advance equality, and by doing that, it guides you to identify ways to reduce and prevent inequality. And the tool really focuses on people. It's people-centric. So whatever your decision making that you're doing, or whatever you're doing, thinking about who are the people most impacted, or who's your target population, and then asking what is the diversity within that population, and then how could these folks be impacted differently by this work or by this decision, and then tailoring your approach to help everyone be successful. So there are a number of benefits of GBA Plus that include enhanced decision making, improved data, because now you're collecting data that's disaggregated by identity factor, improved communication, greater effectiveness. I've seen it increase greater empathy and staff engagement. It's cost effective. I have not seen it delay projects. I have not seen it be more expensive. And it advocates for essentially equality of opportunity. So when we talk about the diversity of folks that may be impacted by our decisions or by our work, we're really talking about identity diversity. And there's two types of diversity. There's diversity of thought and perspectives, and then identity diversity. And often we focus on this identity diversity, which, as you can see here, is largely demographic based, because it's believed that if you bring in and focus on different folks with identity diversity, that they will bring you, that creates that diversity of thought and perspectives. So as you can see, these include internal dimensions as well as external dimensions, and also include even organizational dimensions if you're in a workplace context. So all of these are important to consider. It's not meant to be a checklist or a checkbox. GBA Plus encourages you again to lead with thinking who's my target population, or what's the population that could be most impacted, and then using this to guide their research and data gathering of what's the diversity within that population. And it takes an intersectional approach. And what that essentially means is that all of these different identity factors kind of overlay in unique ways and produce different experiences. So for instance, your gender can be impacted by your religion. Your race can be impacted by your culture. Your sexual orientation can dictate where you live in the world or where you feel comfortable living in the world, so your geographic location. So they all interact and affect each other in different ways. A quick example is I was raised Roman Catholic, and I self-identify my gender as a woman. Now, that religion and the way I was raised in it had a number of different gender expectations. And so that impacted my own personal view of my gender, whether or not I agreed and followed or actively rejected it. And intersectionality is another example, is often when we talk about pay equity or the wage gap. You often hear a statistic that says women earn on average, I think, 87 cents what a man earns in a year. But really, if we look at that statistic and try to solve that problem, that statistic won't do it. It won't cut it because it doesn't take an intersectional perspective. That statistic is primarily from white women. Women with disabilities make significantly less. Indigenous women make significantly less. Women of color make much less as well, and new immigrant women do as well. So unless we understand all these different facets and layers, we wouldn't be able to effectively solve a problem or understand it fully. So GBA Plus really centers gender and sex. And this is just a quick sort of refresher. Again, sex is biological and physiological. It's what's assigned at birth. Gender is that broader spectrum. And it's there's gender identity, which is largely internal, which is your own self-identification of as a woman or as a man or non-binary. And then gender expression is how you externally express and present your gender to the world. So this is just important to keep in mind and to not accidentally exclude different types of gender when you're doing a GBA Plus analysis. Another core component is related to race and ethnicity, two terms that are often used interchangeably. But race is primarily associated with kind of physical, visible characteristics, whether that be skin color, your hair texture, facial features, whereas ethnicity is linked more with cultural expression and identification. Now, what's interesting is even though race is just very visible, we were often taught, and it was often expressed in the past, that race, there's a biological basis for race, but there isn't. We know that there are more variations within genetics of folks within a certain race than there are between. So race is really similar to gender as a spectrum, a social construct. Race, our understanding of race and even gender have evolved and changed over time and continue to evolve and change over time. Now, ability and disability. This is a core component. So I'm just going over the identity factors that are included in almost all GBA Plus analyses right now. So disability, the most commonly advocated term is people with disabilities. And it's important to have the perspective that people with disabilities are only disabled by the world they live in, and systems and structures that don't accommodate them or weren't designed with them in mind. People with disabilities are often underrepresented in media conversations or within different rights movements. And disabilities can vary, whether they're cognitive or physical or visible or invisible. Now in GBA Plus, it's imperative to have that sort of solid understanding of diversity, intersectionality, and what the different identity factors, like the ones we just went over, mean, but also overlaying that with power and privilege. So understanding that some groups in society, so out of all of those identity factors, every identity factor has a dominant group and then less advantaged groups. For instance, if we look at race, the most advantaged group in our country, in our society, are white people. And privilege is the notion that you can have more benefits, more access, kind of an easier time slightly in the world than others, but only because of your identity. So only because your skin is white. It doesn't mean that you haven't experienced hardships or haven't, worked your way up and worked really hard. That is kind of moot in the concept of privilege. What privilege really is just because of a particular identity factor you may have, there are certain things that you have easier access to than others. So understanding that and the unique impacts of that are really important in a GBA Plus analysis. Another component is unconscious bias. So when we go through the GBA Plus process, this is essentially step 2. So unconscious bias, this is the notion that every single person has biases. So it's important to be cognizant of them as much as you can in your analysis and in all of your decision making. So it's not clouded by these biases. And you can have personal biases, and there can also be organizational biases to be aware of. Often when you hear the phrase, "This is how we've always done things here," or "These are the people we've always gone to consult with for this decision making," those are some examples of biases. So this process of GBA Plus actively encourages you to disrupt that type of thinking and to ensure everything is really evidence-based and that you're not missing anything or accidentally excluding people. And unconscious biases, again, they're in all of us. They're socialized into us, even from our childhood. And these biases are really instinctual to us in a sense. At any given time, there's 11 million pieces of information coming at us. Our brains have to sort, prioritize, and triage them. So being able to make really quick decisions and snap judgments according to just what we observe and easily observed criteria can be beneficial in terms of understanding when you're in danger really quickly. But other than that, these biases often cloud our decisions and our judgments and cause us to over rely on stereotypes, which are often incorrect. So, and these are so ingrained, we know within the first 7 seconds of meeting a person, we can have a solid impression of who we think they are. And within a blink of an eye or a tenth of a second, we're already able to determine traits like trustworthiness. And now if we are stressed out, where we have time constraints, our biases are magnified. And one of the most common ways biases show up is through microaggressions. So microaggressions are subtle kind of slings and arrows through our language that make folks feel excluded and like they don't belong. So these are some examples of these microaggressions on the slide. Now, biases in this whole process are very impactful because even though they may be internal and seem innocent, if we have unconscious biases or prejudices about groups of people that are unchecked or that we're not fully cognizant of, our actions then can be discriminatory unintentionally. And then discrimination backed by power is what is oppression. So for example, if we have unchecked unconscious biases and we are responsible for developing a new program of outreach, let's say, then we could be designing that program in a discriminatory manner without even realizing it. And then because that program has power from our workplace and our institution and that authority that that organization has, can cause oppression. So here's kind of the fun part of what can we do with all this and how does this all come together? So I mentioned earlier, GBA Plus is an equity tool. And as you can see in this image, On the far left, well, in all images, the goal is for all three people to be able to watch the soccer game effectively. In the far left image, these three folks are being treated the same. We often like to think that if we treat people or design things the exact same way for everyone, that we're being fair. But we know that that's not fair because everyone's starting from different places and the world is unequal. So giving them the same treatment here doesn't help us achieve our objectives or help most folks be successful. Now, the middle image here is where we recognize that these people have different needs and they're very different. So we tailor our approaches to help them be successful and to meet our objectives. And that's where we're successful. And that's essentially what GBA Plus does. It helps you identify those unique needs and then you build for them. The image on the far right is where you were able to identify that root cause and that systemic barrier and just remove it completely, which is sort of the end goal. Often when you're doing GBA Plus work, you're able to detect what that systemic barrier is, but it may not always be within your power to remove it. So that's why we lead with an equity approach with the goal of advancing equality. So this is the process. There's 5 steps. And they're similar to kind of other project management steps, but there's sort of guiding questions under each one, which make it unique. So for instance, step 1 is where you start by thinking, okay, let's set our scope and outcomes for this GBA Plus analysis, and this is where we sort of identify what the issue is or the decision that we're making. And we think, who is the target population? Have I considered the diversity that exists within that group? Or what has triggered this issue? And who is it most important to, or whose voice is most prominent and whose voice may be quieter? Then step 2 is about challenging assumptions, and that's a cue for unconscious biases. So this is essentially asking yourself, okay, if I think this issue is neutral, what evidence do I have to confirm that it is? Most often, everything has gendered implications or racial implications or ability implications. So almost nothing is what we call quote unquote neutral. So in this stage, you also do a little bit of self-reflection. What biases may I have that are clouding my judgment or making me think a certain way about this topic or issue or the people involved? And actively try to challenge that and make sure that all of your views are evidence-based. Then you shift to step 3 around research and consultations. So fundamental to any diversity, equity, and inclusion project or GBA Plus project is the idea of nothing about us without us. So ensuring that you co-create and bring in those groups that are most effective, either as consultations or advisors. It can really vary according to the project. And then step 4 is where you develop options and make recommendations. So this is where you look at how you're also going to implement it and how can you implement it in a way that's inclusive and accessible, and that will still help advance equity and equality. Then you go to step 5, which is around actually implementing it, where you monitor and evaluate and adjust as needed. So as you go through this implementation process and you start to do the work, just being cognizant of how different groups are impacted in the implementation is really important. So here to quickly review, these are core elements of any GBA Plus analyses. So every GBA Plus analysis considers and holds central diversity, intersectionality, and equity, considers power and privilege, unconscious biases. The goal is to identify and disrupt harmful social norms and to actively advance equality. And then also clear communication and transparency is incredibly important for any GBA Plus analyses. So to give you some examples, GBA Plus has been applied across the country and even across the world because it's requirements for international development organizations as well. But as an example, the city of Calgary uses GBA Plus, and one example was their census. So the municipal census wanted to expand their gender option and wasn't sure how. They initially added a male, female, other option. In their analysis, they realized male, female was a sex question, not a gender question. So they expanded the options to woman, man, and included non-binary, and then also another. And they consulted with a number of different local organizations in order to make that decision. And they were able to get much better data because of it. City of Calgary also used it for a transit safety plan. They initially thought women were the core group that was getting harassed and assaulted most on transit. Then after they did this analysis, they found out it's not just all women, it's primarily racialized women, younger women, LGBTQ2S+ women, and only in particular pockets of the city, and also more so on buses than on the C train. So then they were able to solve for that much more effectively. Government of Alberta, Government of Canada has lots of great GBA Plus examples. One from the Government of Alberta was when they amended the Elections Act. They looked at voter turnout by demographic, found really low rates in young people, universities, prisons, work camps, hospitals, and shelters, and also in advanced voting. So they set up way more advanced voting stations. They set up polling stations in all of those areas that had low voter turnout previously, and were able to dramatically impact voter turnout, which was quite incredible. So that is sort of gender-based analysis plus GBA pluses in a nutshell. Please feel free to reach out, connect with us at Canadian Equality. We'd love to hear from you and also learn from you. Happy to help you apply this powerful tool to your work. This is our social media accounts, and this is how you can reach out to me specifically, and I look forward to hearing from you. So thank you so much for having me today. I don't see any questions coming in the Q&A. I believe we have about 1 minute left. I'll keep my eye on it though, but thank you everyone so much for participating, for your interest in this topic. It's a really great, really powerful equity tool. And I hope you get the chance to explore it a bit more and apply it to your work, whether it's program design, policy development, research, service delivery, you name it, it can be applied to anything. So thank you very much. Oh, there's a question here. What are the costs of consulting with you? I just stopped my screen share. You can still see me. I work in a nonprofit. Great question. We have much lower nonprofit rates, and please reach out. I'd love to hear from you, learn a bit more of what you're looking for, and how we could work together and support you or partner with you. The costs really vary based on the project, I guess, but happy to support nonprofits. We love working with nonprofits. Any other questions? Okay, well, I believe we're at our time, but please reach out. I look forward to hearing from you, and have a great rest of your day.